Let's cross to Adelaide now and catch up with former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer back in the country from London. Great to talk to you again, Alexander, and of course a former leader of the Liberal Party, importantly in this discussion, because you've written in the Australian Financial Review this week about the horrible year the Liberals have had, bad election losses in South Australia, in Victoria and federally. And you say that the party has essentially abandoned its core values. What does it need to do?
Well, this segues into what you've just been discussing before I came on, the growth of the state. I mean, you talk about the nanny state and rules and regulations. We can add to that the huge growth in public expenditure and more of the economy really becoming controlled by the state, which means that, you know, the Liberal Party's core belief in the selfless individual, as Menzies would describe them, of individual freedom, individual decision-making, consumers deciding the broad direction of society, of economic society, people being responsible for their own actions rather than the state being responsible for everything. The Liberal Party has essentially lost that debate for the time being. The debate has been won by the progressive left, who want a much more regulated society. They want much bigger government. They want government to be a bigger proportion of GDP. They want government to have more control over society. So the Liberal Party should be articulating its broader values about the selfless individual making his or her own choices and contrasting itself with the alternative model, which is becoming the status quo model. So whether they'll do that or whether they won't, it's not really for me to judge, but that I think would help them. I mean, a political party which is just managerialist, which is just about managing things, is not going to inspire people, particularly young people. It's not going to inspire them. And to inspire young people, you have to inject a sense of values and idealism. That's going to be an important part of the future for the Liberal Party.
It takes a bit of intellectual rigour because these are not easy arguments to make or policies to deliver, but it influences big policy areas such as climate change, net zero, and massively transforming our energy grid is a massive expansion of government involvement.
Yes, it's right. I mean, there are two things that have really played into the hands of the progressive. I call them the progressive left. They used to be called socialists, but they hated that, so they now like to be called the progressive left. So whatever they want to be called, the progressive left have been helped by two things. One is climate change, which their response to it doesn't have to be the response to it, but their response to it is to regulate much more of the economy and, more than that, regulate much more of our lifestyles. And secondly, there was the pandemic. They closed down society, well, you know, governments, not just progressive left governments, but so-called liberal governments closed down society, and they did that internationally, of course. And this led to a massive increase in public expenditure. As the Labor Party keeps saying today, they inherited $1 trillion debt. That may not be entirely true, but nevertheless, this has, of course, indebted future generations. So you've got a combination of climate change and the response to the pandemic, which has led to a huge increase in the involvement of the state in people's lives and in the overall economy as well. So it has proved to be quite popular for the time being, and it's important for people who don't believe in a huge state and who do believe in selfless individuals to get out there and start making the alternative arguments.
Yeah, the thing was at the last federal election, especially on two core issues that normally are strong for the coalition. One is economic management. The other was reliable, affordable energy, not going too far on climate change. Well, there was no difference, really. You had two big spending, high debt agendas with deficits as far as the eye could see. And Scott Morrison rolled over on net zero by 2050. Was that a mistake, the net zero pledge?
Well, I'm not sure about. Of course, everybody knows this net zero pledged by all countries, not just by Australia, is just pie in the sky because by 2050, nobody who's in power today will be remotely in power by then, and the world will be a different place by 2050. So, in truth, it doesn't really mean very much, and I think the average punter knows that. I think what the coalition should have done is differentiate its product on climate change, because after all, whatever Australia does is not going to change the weather. This is a global response that there has to be. Australia's contribution to it has to be proportionate, not disproportionate. We don't want to do ourselves more damage than we have to in addressing this issue. I'm glad to see the Liberal Party is now talking about nuclear energy as a response to reducing dependence on fossil fuels and reducing CO2 emissions, and changes in technology, and that is investing in research and development in relevant technologies, is also going to be a much less damaging way to go than massively increasing people's energy prices. And it's not sustainable to keep increasing their energy prices, of course, because people will get fed up with it.
I think energy is going to get worse for this country, and I think the policy differentiation on nuclear will be a clear point of difference for the coalition under Peter Dutton. But on the other issues, trying to wind back the reach of the state and wind back government spending, that's absolutely right to do that, but gee, it's hard to deliver.
It is hard to deliver, but I've often said don't approach policies without having a context for those policies, without having a framework for those policies. So you've got to outline your values and explain why you want to pursue certain policies. I mean, the genius of the two greatest post-war Australian Prime Ministers, Menzies and Howard, is that these people had a sense of values. And you knew what they stood for, and then their policies were articulated in the context of those values, not out of context. Yeah. So I don't want to over-intellectualise this, but if your policies are out of context, then they just become managerialist, and you look as though you're just responding to opinion polls.
Well said. Great advice for your party. Have a great Christmas, and hopefully I'll catch you for an ale in South Australia over the summer. Alexander Downer there.
Look forward to it.